Brandon Sanderson has been reviewed positively by Reddit artists everywhere, and looking at some of these reviews, you might be starting to think that he is the greatest thing that's ever lived. But actually, I think he's shit. Now, I have to say that I've never actually finished reading any of his books fully because there's always something that I have to skip. So, I will be talking about the only two books that I partially read, which are the two best books, The Way of Kings and The Words of Radiance from the Stormlight Archives. So basically, this is how you read a Brandon Sanderson book. Discard any chapter that has a woman in it, and also get rid of all of the inter-chapter things that don't have anything to do with the main story, because these books are entirely filled with them and they don't contribute anything. So the third book in the series is entirely filler as well, which is why I stopped reading after that, because I don't want to read a book that's entirely filler. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute. This book is 95% positively rated. Surely there's something good about it, surely all of these people can't be lying. Well, I guess I must be part of the 5% because I don't think it's good at all. See, let me give you a quick recap of book 1, okay? There's a guy, his name is like fucking Caliphate or something, and he's basically the son of like a doctor. And the doctor wants him to be another doctor, but he doesn't want to be a doctor, so he goes to war, and he brings his brother to war, and his brother dies during the war, so he's sad. And then he leads a squad in the war, and he captures a lightsaber, but he doesn't want the lightsaber, so he gives it to his people in a squad. But then the general of his squad was like, no, I want the lightsaber. So basically, he brands him as a deserter and makes him into a slave. Then he tries to escape from everybody that he ever gets held as a slave for. And he tries to kill some of them, and he tries to kill himself. And then he gets put in the worst place possible, which is like the Shattered Coast or some shit. I don't know. Which is basically Vietnam, but instead of a jungle, there's giant cracks everywhere. So his job is to carry a bridge so that it can cross the giant cracks, which is like the worst job in history because he carries it on his fucking shoulders and they bleed always. So basically, he goes around carrying this bridge all the time, and everybody around him dies, but he doesn't because he's like magic or something. And he has this thing around him that's basically Puck from Berserk. And then he tries to kill himself, but he doesn't. And then he takes on a leadership role in the squad and starts training everybody so there's not as many deaths. And then they execute the highly ingenious move of moving slightly to the side instead of charging directly at the people that are shooting arrows at them. And because all the other bridge crews see this, they try to imitate them, but they fail because they're like retarded or something. So then the assault fails, and Caliphate gets punished for this by being turned into a human lightning rod. But he survives because he's magic, and he also gets like fucking magic powers of a lightsaber or something, I don't know. Basically, he's God. So then he goes out, and instead of running to the side, he takes the corpses of the people shooting at them, the Viet Cong or whatever, and he straps them to his body, and they shoot at him because they're angry about that, so that distracts them, so none of his crew die. And like, yeah, people are still angry at him about that, but like, it works, so he just keeps on doing that. And then eventually, JFK gets stuck on one of these ridges, and he has to save him, and like, he almost dies, and all of his people almost die. But then JFK, because he got saved by Caliphate, he decides to make him not a slave anymore on account of the fact that he saved his life. And he also makes all the other people in his bridge crew not slaves anymore, but he decides not to end the practice of slavery because that's basically the only way that they get across these ridges. But then he gets the ingenious idea of putting wheels on the bridge so that you can push them instead of having to lift them on your arms. So now the offense is slightly slowed down by like 2 seconds, but they stop losing so many men. So they can basically win all the battles from then on. And also, Caliphate gets put as the bodyguard of JFK, but like, he doesn't really like the guy because he was a slave under him, and he thinks that he's a weak ruler, so he doesn't really take his job seriously. And then one day somebody gets sent to kill JFK, but because there aren't any guns in this universe, they have to actually do it themselves. So Caliphate sees this happening, and he thinks to himself, man, perhaps I really should do my one and only job in this world, which is to protect this person. And he does that, and he gets magic powers on behalf of doing literally his job. So then he saves JFK's life again, and then they like win the battle or some shit. I don't know. I think that's book 2. So basically, he goes up to the general dude that made him a slave initially, and he goes, "Naughty, naughty! Go to the corner and think about what you've done. Also, you're not a general anymore, and give me the lightsaber." And then that's book 1. Basically, I cut out all the parts that don't matter, which is the parts with the woman. Her story is basically her father is in debt and she needs money, so she goes to steal a bracelet or some shit, and then she gets caught because she's allergic to strawberries or some shit. And the woman gives her the bracelet anyways after she asks nicely for it. So yeah, that's basically half of the book summarized. There's also the intermediate parts where they talk about the fucking guy who killed the king, but I don't care about that. That entire storyline goes nowhere because at the end of book 2 he gets swept up into like a fucking tornado or something, and then he becomes like the messenger of God. I don't know. Anyway, book 1 was okay if you cut out 50% of it. Book 2, like I said, I only managed to get through by reading exclusively the dialogue because that's when it gets terrible. The moment at which I knew that the series would only be going downhill was a certain point in book 2 where they were hiding from a storm or something in like one of the cracks, and the Caliphate and the woman were there together. So they were just talking about their life because like they literally had nothing else to do. So then Caliphate is like, "Oh yeah, I was like a slave and I had like the worst job in the world, and like all my family and friends died and everybody around me died, and I almost died multiple times, and like I considered committing suicide because life was so terrible, and I had to protect all these people that I fucking hated, and that's basically how I got my superpowers." And then the woman is like, yeah, you know what, that makes sense because, I also went through an equivalent amount of suffering to get my superpowers. I was poor and my family was kind of mean to me, so our suffering is like equivalent. And like when they literally tried to equate those two storylines together is when I knew that like this would only be getting worse and worse. So that's why I decided not to read any further. So basically, throughout the entirety of book 2, all that happens is like they beat the Viet Cong, but the Viet Cong managed to like summon a giant hurricane that's going to like kill everybody, and the woman's storyline is admitting that she killed her mother and father. So that's basically it. So yeah, like these books aren't that good. Just read like the first law instead. And honestly, it kind of surprised me at how bad these books were because there's really no gays or black characters. So you'd think that would instantly make the book like amazing, but apparently you also need actually a well-written story. So I'd just stick to reading translations of Chinese books because those have no gays and no blacks, and they're actually written well. So they're infinitely times better than this series, which is just terrible for like man children on Reddit that think morally gray makes a story like automatically the best thing in the entire world. Like whenever I see morally gray, I just expect the story to be terrible because like it's just a way to describe fucking everything. Basically just like, oh yeah, the villain in our story, there's no like main villain or something, and the heroes do bad things sometimes, and it's like, okay, that doesn't really make the story automatically good. So if the only thing you have to say about the book is it's morally gray, then I automatically assume that it's going to be a bad book, and it is. It is bad.